In the summer of 1883, a man in New Mexico carried a promise for 5 long years. Today that promise came riding back to find him. The afternoon sun hung heavy over Broken Mesa, turning the desert air thick and still. Dust coated everything. Fence posts, leather saddles, the brim of a worn hat. The only sound for miles was the steady rhythm of hoofbeats against dry earth, mixed with the low, patient murmur of a man gentling a wild horse. James Caldwell stood in the center of his corral, one hand extended, palm open. The mustang before him, a young sorrel mare with fire in her eyes, pawed at the ground and snorted. Her nostrils flared, her muscles tensed beneath a coat darkened by sweat and dust. Jim didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. He'd learned patience the hard way. 5 years of solitude, 5 years of silence, 5 years of building a life from nothing but woodstone and the simple, endless work of survival. The ranch wasn't much. A small cabin he'd built with his own hands, a barn that leaned slightly to the east, 30 acres of scrubland that barely supported a dozen horses. But it was his, and more importantly, it was quiet. The mare took a step forward, then another. Her ears swiveled, listening, evaluating. Jim remained still as stone breathing, slowly letting her decide. This was the dance, the negotiation between trust and fear. He'd done it 100 times, and every time felt like the first. The horse stretched her neck nostrils, searching for his scent. Her muzzle touched his palm. Soft, tentative. Jim's weathered face showed no reaction, but something shifted in his gray eyes. A flicker of satisfaction. Connection. Then the gunshot echoed across the valley. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere at once. A crack that split the afternoon silence like breaking glass. The mare reared, wheeling away in panic. Jim's hand dropped to his hip where a Colt revolver hung in a worn holster. Old instincts. They never died, no matter how long you buried them. But there was no second shot, no smoke on the horizon. Just the fading echo bouncing between the mesa walls. Jim's heart hammered against his ribs. His breathing came fast now, too fast. The world tilted, and suddenly he wasn't standing in a sunlit corral anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere dark. The flashback hit like a physical blow. Nighttime, a canyon ringed with firelight. The sound of gunfire rapid and overlapping, creating a terrible thunder. Screams, the high piercing screams of women and children. Flames climbing the sides of wickiups, turning shelter into funeral pyres. And smoke thick and choking, turning the stars invisible. A child's voice breaking through the chaos, small hands gripping his neck so hard they left marks, the weight of her against his chest as he ran, his lungs burning, his eyes streaming, the world reduced to heat and horror, and the desperate need to save just one life. Just one. Jim. Jim, you there? The voice pulled him back. Present tense, present location, his own corral, his own land. His hands were shaking. He forced himself to breathe. 1 breath, 2, 3, counted them the way the army doctor had taught him, back when they still thought talking about it might help. It didn't. Nothing helped except work distance and time. The mare had retreated to the far side of the corral, watching him with wild eyes. Trust broken. It would take days to rebuild what had been lost in a single moment. Jim turned away, pulling off his work gloves. His hands bore the evidence of 5 years spent building from nothing. Calloused palms, scarred knuckles, rope burns that had healed white and permanent. These were honest marks, the kind earned through labor, not violence. He reached for his canteen, lifted it halfway to his mouth, and froze. A figure stood on the ridge, not moving, just watching. Jim had lived out here long enough to know the difference between a traveler passing through and someone who had been standing still for a very long time. The hair on the back of his neck rose. Old instincts, never quite buried, stirred awake like a wolf sensing blood on the wind. He set down the canteen without making a sound. His hand drifted toward the revolver at his hip, fingers brushing the worn grip. He counted his breaths, slowed his heartbeat, watched. The figure began to descend. Slowly, at first unsteady, each step placed carefully, as if the person might collapse at any moment. As they came closer, details emerged from the heat shimmer: small frame, long dark hair, moving with fierce determination, but trembling with every step as if sheer will alone kept them upright. By the time the figure reached the bottom of the slope, Jim could see clearly. A woman, young, exhausted, dangerously close to death. Her deerskin dress was worn thin at the shoulders and stained with dust and sweat. Her long black hair, woven with leather strips, clung to her face. She moved like someone who had walked beyond the limits of human endurance and kept walking anyway. Her legs trembled. Her breathing came shallow and fast. Jim moved forward, not drawing his weapon, but ready. He counted her breaths, noted the way she gripped her side, protecting ribs that might be bruised or broken, scanned the ridge behind her, looking for movement, for dust clouds, for any sign she'd been followed. Nothing. She was alone. She stopped 8 feet from the fence, gripping the top rail to steady herself. Her breathing came fast, almost panicked, but her eyes never left his face. Dark eyes. Apache eyes. Full of pain, she tried to hide beneath a mask of stubborn courage. When she spoke, her voice cracked on the first word. "Do you remember me, Cowboy?" The question struck something deep inside him, something he'd thought was dead. Jim studied her face, forcing his mind through the exhaustion, through the years, through the careful walls he'd built around certain memories. Her eyes dark and alert, burning with an intensity that cut through the pain, pulled at something in the darkness where he'd tried to bury it. A child's voice, tiny hands gripping his neck, the weight of one small life he'd refused to let go. His heartbeat quickened. Recognition. "I've seen you," he said slowly, voice rough as gravel. "Years ago, near the cliffs." Her shoulders shook from the effort of standing upright. She swallowed hard, and he saw her throat work against the dryness. "I'm the girl you saved that night." Her whisper barely carried across the distance between them. "My name is Sarah Morningstar." A cold weight settled in Jim's stomach. She wasn't a child anymore. She was a woman now, grown, strong in posture despite being worn down by sun and fear. The little girl who'd clung to him in the darkness had become someone who'd walk through hell to find him again. She lifted her chin, trying to maintain dignity despite her condition. "I had nowhere else to turn," she said quietly. "You were my only hope. The direction you rode, the shape of these hills. I thought maybe you were still alive. Maybe you'd remember." Jim's throat tightened. Half a decade spent convincing himself that distance could erase memory. It couldn't. And now here she stood, proof that some things couldn't be buried. "What happened to you?" His voice came out harder than he intended. Her jaw tightened. Shame flickered across her face, quickly replaced by anger. "After the fighting, my tribe scattered. Some blamed me, said I should have died with the others, said I brought bad luck." She paused, and Jim saw her hands grip the fence rail tighter. 3 weeks ago, men came. They took me. Their leader, he knew about that night. He knew I survived. He said he couldn't leave witnesses." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I escaped 2 nights ago, cut my bonds on a sharp rock, ran through the canyons. I didn't sleep, I didn't stop, I didn't want to die alone in the dust." Her knees buckled. Jim moved without thinking. Years of isolation disappeared in an instant. He caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her waist and shoulders, stabilizing her as she leaned heavily into him. Her breath brushed his neck, warm and quick and desperate. Her trembling body pressed against his chest, and he felt her ribs expand unevenly beneath his hands. Sarah clutched the front of his shirt, not in fear, but because she had no strength left. "I'm not leaving you out here," Jim said. The decision formed faster than thought. Instinct, maybe, or something older than instinct, a debt that couldn't be ignored. She tried to speak, but the words came out weak and quiet. "I told myself if I reached you, you wouldn't turn me away." Jim lifted her into his arms in one smooth motion. She let out a soft sound, half relief, half exhaustion. Her head rested lightly against his chest. She smelled of dust sweat and smoke from long journeys, the scent of someone who'd pushed past every human limit and somehow survived. He felt the fragile strength still left in her, the stubborn will that had pushed her across 60 miles of desert alone. As he stepped through the open doorway of his cabin, he felt the old familiar tightness in his throat, the mixture of protectiveness, anger, and guilt he'd avoided for years. He set her carefully on the edge of his cot, the only bed in his one-room home. She tried to sit straight, but her arms shook. Her eyes searched his, waiting for him to decide her fate, waiting to see if the man who'd saved her once would do it again. The cabin was sparse: a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, shelves holding supplies, no photographs, no memories, nothing to remind him of a life before this one. Jim moved to his water barrel, filled a tin cup, and handed it to her. "Drink slowly. Too much at once will make you sick." She obeyed, sipping carefully, her hands shaking around the cup. Jim knelt beside the cot, his movements methodical. He'd learned field medicine during the war, how to assess injuries, how to prioritize, how to keep someone alive when everything was falling apart. Her wrists showed rope burns, but they were healing, old enough that they no longer needed bandaging. Her ribs were bruised, but not broken. He could see that much through the thin fabric of her dress. A long cut on her calf had scabbed over, but would need cleaning. He worked quietly, efficiently, giving her space to breathe, to feel safe. Sarah finished the water and set down the cup. Her breathing had slowed. Some color was returning to her face. "Thank you," she said, "for not turning me away." Jim stood, moving to the window. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of red and gold. He scanned the ridge, the creek bed, the open ground between his homestead and the distant hills. Nothing moved, but something felt wrong. "Who's after you?" he asked, not turning from the window. Sarah's voice came quiet behind him. "His name is Captain Nathaniel Blackwood." Jim's hand tightened on the window frame. The name hit him like a fist to the gut. He turned slowly, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes gave him away. Sarah saw the recognition there, the shock, the anger. "You know him," she said. It wasn't a question. Jim crossed the room, pulled out one of the chairs, and sat down heavily. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at his hands, calloused and scarred, and tried to make sense of a world that kept pulling him back to that one terrible night. "Blackwood was my commanding officer," he said finally. "The night at Crimson Ridge I was scouting under his command." Sarah's breath caught. Jim continued, his voice flat, reciting facts because emotion would make it impossible to speak. "I was a scout. My job was to find Apache camps, track their movements, report back. I did my job well." He paused. "Too well." He met her eyes. "The night of the raid I led the cavalry to what I thought was a warrior camp. That's what the intelligence said. Armed men, stolen weapons. A staging ground for attacks. But it wasn't," Sarah whispered. "No, it was families, women, children, elders. By the time I realized the mistake, the shooting had started. The fires were lit. I tried to stop it, tried to get the men to cease fire, but orders are orders, and soldiers follow orders." His voice dropped. "I saved who I could. You and 3 others. But 23 people died that night. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Even the wind outside seemed to have stopped." "Did you know?" Sarah asked. "Did you know it was the wrong target?" "No. I followed the information I was given, but that doesn't make me innocent." "Who gave you the information?" Jim's jaw tightened. "Captain Nathaniel Blackwood." The name hung in the air between them like a curse. Sarah closed her eyes, processing the weight of his words. When she opened them again, tears glistened, but didn't fall. "My father told me something before he died. He said the attack wasn't an accident. He said someone betrayed us." She looked at Jim. "You didn't kill my father. Blackwood did. I led them there." "You were lied to," she said firmly. "You tried to save us, that's what I remember. Not the fire, not the bullets. I remember you carrying me. I remember feeling safe for the first time that night. Something loosened in Jim's chest, something he'd been holding tight for 5 years. But he couldn't allow himself the relief. Not yet. Why is Blackwood after you now? After all this time, Sarah shifted on the cot, wincing slightly. 3 weeks ago, I was living with a small group near Mesa Springs. We kept to ourselves, tried to stay invisible. Then, one night, men came. They took me and 2 others. Blackwood was leading them. She paused, gathering courage. He recognized me, said I was one of the survivors from Crimson Ridge. He said he couldn't leave witnesses. He was going to sell me to the mine bosses up north. Use me like property. Jim's hands clenched into fists. How did you escape? There was another man, Apache. His name is Tom Redbird. He was forced to work for Blackwood. Tom helped me escape, but his sister Lily is still captive. Blackwood holds her to keep Tom obedient. Jim stood pacing to the window again. Outside, the shadows were lengthening. Night would come soon, and with it the question of whether they'd been followed. There's more, Sarah said quietly. Tom told me something before I left. He said Blackwood isn't just afraid of survivors. He's afraid of the truth coming out. There's a soldier, a sergeant named Jacob Winters. He was there that night. He knows what Blackwood did. He's planning to testify, and Blackwood wants to stop him by eliminating anyone who can corroborate his story. Sarah's voice hardened. Tom said Blackwood has spies everywhere. He'll know I'm here eventually. Jim turned from the window, his decision made. Then we don't wait for him to find us. We prepare, and when he comes, we make sure justice is served. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. You'd fight for me, even though I'm practically a stranger now. You're not a stranger, Jim said quietly. You're the reason I'm still alive. She blinked, confused. I don't understand. After that night, I thought about eating a bullet every day for a year. The only thing that stopped me was knowing you'd made it out. Knowing I'd done one thing right. He met her eyes. So no, you're not a stranger. Tears finally fell, tracking clean lines through the dust on Sarah's face. But she didn't sob, didn't break, just let them fall. Jim moved to the cupboard, pulled out a blanket, and handed it to her. Rest. I'll keep watch tonight. Sarah lay back on the cot, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Within minutes, her breathing slowed and deepened, but even in sleep, her body remained tense, ready to run. Jim sat against the wall, rifle across his knees, and settled in for the long night ahead. He'd kept watch before, knew how to stay alert when every instinct screamed for sleep, knew how to separate the sounds that belonged from the sounds that didn't. Every shift of wind, every creak of wood, every distant cry of a night bird. Sarah cried out twice in her sleep, speaking words in Apache he didn't understand. Each time Jim moved closer, ready to wake her if the nightmares became too much. But she fought through them the way she'd fought through everything else. As the hours crept toward midnight, Jim thought about the name she'd spoken. Blackwood. The man who'd been his mentor, the officer he'd trusted more than any other, the man who'd taught him how to read the land, how to move silently, how to survive. The man who'd orchestrated the murder of 23 people for gold. Because that's what it had been, Jim realized now. Not a military error, not faulty intelligence. Murder, premeditated and executed with cold precision. Blackwood had needed the Apache removed from Crimson Ridge, and he'd found a way to do it that looked legal, that looked justified. Jim's hands tightened on the rifle. Tomorrow he would start making plans. He would figure out how to protect Sarah, how to rescue Tom's sister, how to make sure Blackwood faced justice. But tonight all he could do was keep watch, keep her safe. Honor the promise he'd made 5 years ago. I promise you'll be safe. He'd said it without thinking, in the chaos and fire, a child in his arms, smoke filling his lungs, death all around. He'd said it because he needed to believe it himself, because if he couldn't save her, then everything was lost. Now she'd come back, and he had a chance to keep that promise properly. Outside, the moon rose thin and pale. A coyote called from somewhere in the hills. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters, and Jim Caldwell sat in the darkness, rifle ready, waiting for the wolves to come. Dawn came cold and gray. Jim hadn't slept. He'd kept watch through the night, every sense tuned to the land beyond his cabin walls, listening for the sound of hoofbeats, watching for the flicker of torches, waiting for violence that never came. Sarah stirred as pale light filtered through the narrow window. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the unfamiliar space. For a moment, confusion clouded her face. Then memory returned. She turned her head and saw Jim sitting against the wall, dark circles under his eyes, jaw shadowed with stubble. "You stayed awake all night," she said quietly. "Old habits." He stood joints, protesting after hours of stillness. "Can't seem to break them." Sarah pushed herself up slowly, testing her body's limits. The rest had helped. Her movements were steadier now, less fragile. But Jim could see the wariness in her eyes, the constant readiness to run. He moved to the stove, stirred the embers back to life, and set a pot of coffee to boil. The ritual was familiar, comforting, something to do with his hands while his mind worked through the problem at hand. "Where do we go from here?" Sarah asked. Jim poured water into a basin, splashed his face, let the cold shock away some of the fatigue. "Nowhere. We stay. We prepare. If your hunters come, we make them regret it. But first, I need to check something." He pulled on his coat, checked his revolver, and moved toward the door. Sarah stood quickly. "If you go, will you come back?" The question held more than fear. It held the weight of every person who'd ever left her behind. Every promise broken, every hope abandoned. Jim stopped, turned, met her eyes directly. "Yes, I'll come back. That's a promise." The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. Before stepping outside, Jim moved to the corner of the room where he kept his weapons. A Winchester rifle leaned against the wall. He pulled it down, checked the action, showed it to Sarah. "You know how to use one of these." "My father taught me to shoot a bow, not guns. Same principle. Point at what you want to stop. Pull the trigger. Don't hesitate." He placed it in her hands, watched her fingers close around the stock, adjusted her grip slightly. "If anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you shoot. Understand?" She nodded, her face set with determination. Outside, the early light spread across the dry land, revealing the stretch of open ground around his homestead. Jim moved quietly, checking for signs of recent tracks. He circled the fence line first, looking for boot prints, disturbed dirt, anything that suggested someone had approached during the night. Nothing. He climbed the ridge Sarah had descended the day before, scanning the horizon in all directions. To the west, the land rolled in gentle waves toward distant mesas. To the east, a creek cut a winding path through scrub brush and stone. To the north, he stopped. Faint in the distance, almost invisible against the landscape, a thin column of smoke rose into the morning air. Not a wildfire. Too controlled. Too deliberate. Someone had made camp. Someone who either didn't care about being found or wanted to be found. Jim watched the smoke for several minutes, calculating distance and direction. 2 miles, maybe less. Close enough to be a threat. Far enough to suggest they were waiting for something. He returned to the cabin, moving faster now. Sarah stood when he entered, reading the tension in his posture. "What did you find, Smoke?" "West Ridge, 2 miles out." Her face went pale. "It's them. Maybe. We prepare either way." Jim moved with purpose now. He pulled a wooden crate from beneath the table and opened it, revealing boxes of ammunition, a second revolver, and several strips of dried meat. He began loading weapons methodically, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched him work, then spoke quietly. "You said you'd tell me. About that night. About what really happened." Jim's hands stilled. He'd known this moment would come, known she deserved the truth. He set down the rifle and sat on the edge of the table. "I was 29 when I joined the cavalry as a scout. Good at tracking, good at reading the land. Captain Blackwood saw potential in me, took me under his wing, taught me everything he knew. He paused, sorting through memories. For 3 years, I trusted him completely. He was more than my commanding officer. He was like the father I'd lost when I was 14. What changed? Jim met her eyes. Crimson Ridge. The night of the raid, Blackwood gave me intelligence. A report saying Apache warriors were staging attacks from a camp in the canyon. Armed men, weapons caches, a clear military target. But it wasn't true. I didn't know that then. I believed him, trusted him. So, when he ordered me to lead the cavalry there, I did, without question. His voice grew harder. We arrived at midnight. I scouted ahead, saw the wiki-ups, heard voices. I reported back. Blackwood gave the order to attack. Sarah's hands tightened on the rifle. The shooting started before I could get close enough to see who we were firing at. By the time I saw the women, the children, it was too late. The soldiers thought they were under attack, thought they were defending themselves. Did you try to stop it? I tried. Jim's voice cracked slightly. Rode back to Blackwood, told him we'd made a mistake. He looked at me and said, "Scouts can be wrong, Caldwell. Soldiers follow orders." Jim stood paced to the window. I went back, pulled people from burning shelters, saved who I could. You. 2 others who were children. 1 elder who died 2 days later from burns. He turned back to Sarah. 23 people died because I trusted the wrong man. Sarah was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. You were deceived. There's a difference between being deceived and being guilty. I led them there. And you saved the people you could, including me. She stood still, holding the rifle. My father's last words to me, he said the man who carried me out had kind eyes. He said I should remember that not all white men were the same. Jim felt something break inside him, something that had been locked tight for 5 years. Why would Blackwood do it? Sarah asked. Jim took a breath. There were rumors about gold in Crimson Ridge Canyon. Apache land protected by treaty. But if the Apache were labeled hostile, if there was an incident, the treaties wouldn't matter. The land would be seized. And Blackwood made sure he was first in line to claim it. Exactly. Within 3 months of the massacre, he'd left the army, filed claims on mining rights, made a fortune. Sarah's face hardened. So my father, my brothers, my friends, they all died for gold. Yes. The cabin fell silent. Outside a crow called. The wind picked up rattling loose boards. Finally Sarah spoke. When Blackwood took me 3 weeks ago, he said something. He said he couldn't have witnesses, that he'd worked too hard to let the past destroy his future. Did he say anything else? She nodded. He mentioned a name, Sergeant Jacob Winters. He said Winters was becoming a problem, that he needed to be dealt with. Jim's jaw tightened. Tom told me Winters is planning to testify, to report Blackwood's crimes to the Army headquarters. But Blackwood has spies, he knows. Then we're running out of time, Jim said. Blackwood will move against Winters soon, and he'll make sure anyone who can support Winters' testimony is silenced first. Sarah looked at the rifle in her hands. What do? We ride to Mesa Springs. There's a man there, Sam Whitaker. He's good people. If anyone can help us, contact the authorities. Spread the word. It's him. Sarah nodded. When do we leave? Jim glanced out the window. The sun was climbing higher. They had maybe 6 hours before dark. We pack light, ride fast, stay off the main trails. With luck, we'll make Mesa Springs by nightfall. He moved to gather supplies, canteens, ammunition, dried meat, a spare blanket. Sarah watched his movements, the efficiency of a man who'd done this before. Jim, she said. He turned. Thank you for believing me, for not sending me away. Jim met her eyes. I gave you a promise 5 years ago. I intend to keep it. They worked in silence, preparing for the journey. Jim saddled 2 horses, a bay gelding for himself, and a smaller paint mare for Sarah. She mounted easily, her Apache upbringing evident in the way she moved with the horse rather than against it. As they rode out, Jim took one last look at his cabin. 5 years he'd lived there, 5 years of peace, or at least the absence of violence. Part of him knew he might never see it again. that once he stepped back into the world there would be no retreat. But Sarah rode ahead of him, straight-backed and determined, and he knew the choice had already been made. Some promises were worth dying for. They rode through the morning, following game trails and dry creek beds, avoiding anywhere a man on horseback might be easily seen. The land stretched empty around them, broken only by scrub brush and scattered juniper. The sun climbed higher, turning the air hot and still. Around midday they stopped to rest the horses and drink from a small spring Jim knew. Sarah dismounted gracefully, leading her horse to water. "You ride well," Jim observed. "Apache children learn to ride before they can walk properly." She smiled slightly. "My father put me on a horse when I was 3, said if I was going to be part of the people I needed to move like the people." "What happened to your mother?" "She died when I was young. Fever. After that it was just my father and my 2 brothers, the ones who died at Crimson Ridge." Sarah nodded, her expression carefully neutral. Jim wanted to say something comforting, but the words felt hollow. What comfort could he offer for a loss he'd helped create, however unknowingly? Instead he said, "Your father was right, about the kind eyes. He knew character when he saw it." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "You carry too much guilt, Jim Caldwell. You were a tool. Blackwood was the hand that wielded it. That doesn't change what happened." "No, but it changes what you do now." They remounted and continued riding. The land began to change as they moved east. More vegetation, signs of water. In the distance, Jim could see the first indication of Mesa Springs, a church steeple rising above low buildings. As they approached the outskirts of town, Jim felt himself tense. He hadn't been here in 5 years, hadn't spoken to anyone beyond the occasional supply run to a trading post 30 miles south. The thought of people, of conversation, of being seen made his skin crawl. But Sarah needed help, and he'd promised. Mesa Springs was small, maybe 200 people. A main street with a general store, a church, a hotel, a marshal's office, horses tied to hitching posts. A few people moving between buildings. Normal, peaceful. Jim led them to the general store, a weathered building with a painted sign that read, "Whitaker's Mercantile." He dismounted, helped Sarah down, and they approached the door together. A bell chimed as they entered. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, filled with the smell of leather tobacco and coffee. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from canned goods to rope to fabric. Behind the counter stood a man in his 60s, thin and wiry, with wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up as they entered, and his face split into a wide smile. "Jim Caldwell. Well, I'll be. 5 years, and the man finally comes down from his mountain. Hello, Sam." Sam Whitaker came around the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. "I thought maybe you'd gone and died up there, or decided you preferred horses to people. Horses are easier to understand," Jim said with the ghost of a smile. Sam's eyes moved to Sarah, taking in her Apache dress, her cautious stance. "And who's this, a friend? She needs help." Sam's expression grew serious. He'd known Jim long enough to read between the lines. "Come on back, we'll talk in private." He led them through a door behind the counter into a small living quarters. A kitchen table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, simple and functional. "Sit," Sam said. "I'll make coffee." As Sam worked, Jim told the story about Crimson Ridge, about Blackwood, about Sarah's escape and the threat they faced. Sam listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each detail. When Jim finished, Sam set down 3 cups of coffee and sat heavily. "Blackwood." He shook his head. "I know the name. Month ago he came through here, tried to tell me I shouldn't sell supplies to Apache, said it was unpatriotic. What did you say I told him? My store serves anyone with money and a civil tongue. Color doesn't matter. What did he do? Threatened to burn me out. But the next day Marshal Ross paid him a visit, told him in no uncertain terms that he doesn't threaten citizens in this town." Jim leaned forward. "Marshal Ross, is he a good man?" "Best marshal we've had in 20 years. Fair, honest. Doesn't care about politics, just the law." Sam looked at Sarah. "You need protection, miss. Legal protection. The marshal can help with that. Sarah glanced at Jim, uncertain. We can trust him, Sam said. Henry Ross is the kind of man who does right even when it's hard. Jim nodded slowly. Then we need to see him. Today. Sam stood. I'll take you over, but first you both look like you could use a proper meal. Sarah, when's the last time you ate? Yesterday morning, she admitted. Then we eat first. Justice can wait 20 minutes. Sam prepared bacon, eggs, and fresh bread. Simple food, but after days of dried meat and creek water, it tasted like a feast. Sarah ate slowly, savoring each bite, and Jim found himself watching her with something approaching contentment. For this moment at least, she was safe. Fed. Among friends. As they ate, Sam talked about the town, about the people, about small dramas and daily life. Normal conversation, the kind Jim had forgotten existed. And slowly he felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. Sarah smiled at something Sam said, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. Sam's cooking is better than yours, she said to Jim. Jim pretended offense. My cooking kept me alive for 5 years. Survival and enjoyment are different things, Sarah replied. Sam laughed a warm, genuine sound. I like her, Jim. She's got spirit. After they ate, Sam led them across the street to the marshal's office, a small building with bars on the windows and a sign that read, Henry Ross, U.S. Marshal. Sam knocked, then entered, without waiting for an answer. Henry, got some folks here need to talk to you. The marshal looked up from a desk covered in paperwork. He was in his early 50s, with gray, threading through dark hair and shrewd eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. He wore a badge pinned to a leather vest and a gun at his hip that looked well used. Sam, what can I do for you? These are friends of mine, Jim Caldwell and Sarah Morningstar. They've got a story you need to hear. Marshal Ross gestured to chairs. Sit down, talk. Jim told the story again, this time with more detail, dates, names, specific crimes. Ross listened carefully, occasionally making notes, his expression unreadable. When Jim finished, Ross leaned back in his chair. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Caldwell. Captain Blackwood is a decorated officer, or was. He's got friends in high places. I know. But it's the truth. Ross looked at Sarah. Miss Morningstar, you're saying you were kidnapped 3 weeks ago. Did anyone witness this? My cousin, Tom Redbird. But he's still being held by Blackwood. His sister Lily is a hostage. Ross drummed his fingers on the desk. Here's my problem. I believe you, but belief isn't evidence. To arrest a man like Blackwood, I need proof. Witnesses, documentation. There's a witness, Jim said. Sergeant Jacob Winters. He was there that night. He knows what Blackwood did. Where is he, Fort Grant? Last I heard. Ross made a note. I'll send a telegraph. See if I can get Winters to come give a statement, but that'll take time. Days, maybe weeks. Sarah spoke up, her voice steady. Marshal Blackwood won't wait weeks. He'll move against Winters, against anyone who threatens him. I understand. But I can't arrest a man without cause. The door opened. Everyone turned. A man stood in the doorway, young, maybe 30, wearing a cavalry uniform. His left arm was in a sling, and his face bore the marks of recent violence. A split lip, bruised jaw, but his eyes were clear and determined. Marshal Ross, he said. My name is Sergeant Jacob Winters. I'm here to file a report against Captain Nathaniel Blackwood for war crimes, murder, and conspiracy. The room went silent. Jim stood slowly, hardly daring to believe. Winters looked at him and nodded. Scout Caldwell, it's been a long time. How did you know to come here? I didn't. I've been traveling for 2 weeks trying to stay ahead of Blackwood's men. Heard there was an honest marshal in Mesa Springs. Figured it was my best chance. He turned to Ross. Sir, I have testimony. I have dates, times, and evidence that Captain Blackwood falsified intelligence reports to justify the massacre at Crimson Ridge. I can prove he profited from the murder of 23 civilians. Marshal Ross stood, his demeanor changing from cautious to focused. Sergeant, sit down. Tell me everything. As Winters began his testimony, Jim felt Sarah's hand find his. He looked at her and saw tears in her eyes. Not sadness. Hope. For the first time in 5 years, justice seemed possible. But outside, unknown to those gathered in the marshal's office, 3 men sat on horses at the edge of town, watching, waiting. One of them raised a spyglass, focused on the marshal's office, and smiled. Then he turned his horse and rode north toward the camp where Captain Nathaniel Blackwood waited for news. The hunt, it seemed, was far from over. The marshal's office felt smaller, with 6 people crowded inside. Marshal Ross sat behind his desk pen, moving steadily across paper as Sergeant Jacob Winters spoke. Jim stood by the window, watching the street. Sarah sat beside Sam Whitaker, her hands folded in her lap, listening to every word. Winters spoke with the precision of a soldier giving a report. No emotion, just facts. Dates. Times. Names. But beneath the flat delivery, Jim could hear the weight of guilt, the same weight he'd carried for 5 years. On the evening of July 11, 1878, Captain Blackwood called me into his tent. Winters said. He showed me an intelligence report stating that Apache warriors were gathering at Crimson Ridge Canyon. The report claimed they had stolen Army weapons and were planning coordinated attacks on settlements. Ross looked up from his notes. "You saw this report?" "Yes, sir. It was typed on official Army stationery, signed by a colonel whose name I didn't recognize at the time." "What happened next?" "Blackwood ordered me to prepare the men for a dawn raid. Said we needed to move fast before the Apaches dispersed. He specifically requested Scout Caldwell to lead us in." Jim turned from the window. "Did he say why he wanted me?" "Specifically?" Winters met his eyes. "He said you were the best tracker he had, that you knew the terrain. He trusted you to get us there quietly." Jim felt the familiar knot in his stomach. Blackwood had used him, used his skills, his loyalty, his trust to make murder look like a military operation. "Continue," Ross said. "We rode out at midnight. Caldwell led us through the canyons. When we arrived at the camp, Blackwood ordered us to surround it, wait for his signal." "What was the signal?" "A gunshot. His gunshot." Ross wrote this down. "And then all hell broke loose. We fired into the camp, burned the shelters. I was on the east flank. I could see people running, heard screaming. It took me maybe 30 seconds to realize something was wrong." "What tipped you off the voices?" "They were high-pitched. Women, children. I saw a woman carrying a baby trying to run. One of our men shot her." Winters' voice cracked slightly. He paused, took a breath, continued. "I ran to Blackwood, told him we were firing on civilians. He looked at me and said, 'Keep your position, Sergeant. These are hostiles.'" Jim closed his eyes. He remembered running to Blackwood, too. Remembered the cold look on the captain's face, the complete absence of surprise. "But you didn't keep your position," Ross said. "No, sir. I went into the camp. Started pulling people out of burning shelters. That's when I saw Caldwell doing the same thing. Between us, we saved 4 people. And the others, 23 dead. Mostly women and children. 5 warriors who were trying to protect their families." Ross set down his pen. "After the raid, what happened?" "We returned to Fort Stanton. Blackwood filed a report claiming we'd successfully neutralized an Apache war party. He said the civilian casualties were regrettable, but unavoidable in combat." "Did you challenge this report?" Winters looked down at his hands. "No, sir, I didn't. I was a sergeant. He was a captain. I told myself maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe they were hostiles. Maybe I just hadn't seen the weapons." "When did you change your mind?" 2 months later. I was at Fort Headquarters, saw a file on Blackwood's desk. The original intelligence report about Crimson Ridge. You're sure it was the original positive? It was handwritten, not typed. And it said the exact opposite of what Blackwood had shown me. It described a peaceful camp. Families. No weapons. No threat. "What did you do?" I confronted him. Asked him about it. He said I must have been mistaken. Said there was only one report and I'd seen it. "But you knew you hadn't been mistaken." "I knew. But I had no proof. The handwritten report disappeared after that day, and Blackwood left the Army 3 months later. Honorable discharge, full benefits. Ross leaned back in his chair. Why come forward now, 5 years later, because Blackwood is still killing people? Winter's voice hardened. 3 weeks ago, I learned he'd kidnapped an Apache woman, planned to sell her. When I started asking questions, his men came after me. He gestured to his wounded arm. They caught me outside Tucson, beat me, told me to keep my mouth shut or they'd finish the job. That's when I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Sarah spoke for the first time since Winters had begun. You were brave to come forward. Winters looked at her, recognition flickering. You were there, one of the children. Sarah nodded. My father died that night. So did my brothers. Winters' voice broke. I'm sorry. You tried to help, Sarah said simply. That matters. Marshal Ross walked to the window beside Jim. This is bigger than I thought. If Blackwood falsified military intelligence, conspired to commit murder for profit, we're talking federal crimes, war crimes. Can you arrest him? Jim asked. I can try, but I'll need support. Deputies, maybe federal marshals. Blackwood has at least a dozen men working for him now. How many deputies do you have, too? Both good men, but not enough. Sam spoke up from his chair. What if you had more citizens willing to stand witness to help? Ross turned. Sam, I can't ask civilians to face armed men. You're not asking. I'm offering. There are good people in this town who care about justice. Let me talk to them. Ross studied the old storekeeper for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But I want volunteers only. No one who isn't willing. Sam stood. Give me 2 hours. He left, and the office fell quiet. As the office settled, Jim noticed something on the wall behind Sam's counter through the open door. A small Apache basket hung there, intricate weaving, clearly very old. When Sam returned an hour later with his list of volunteers, Jim asked quietly, Sam, that basket, where did it come from? Sam's expression softened, grew distant. My wife made it, 30 years ago, when we first married. Jim waited. Sam continued. She was Apache, Mescalero band. Marrying her cost me half my customers, cost her most of her family. But we had 20 good years before the fever took her. He looked at Sarah through the window. That's why I helped Jim, not just because it's right. Because she would have wanted me to. Because your people showed her more kindness in exile than mine ever did. Sarah had entered quietly, heard the last part. Tears filled her eyes. What was her name? Sarah asked. Nayeli, Sam said. It means, I love you. Ross returned to his desk, began drafting documents. Jim remained at the window. Sarah sat very still, processing everything she'd heard. Winters broke the silence. Caldwell, I need to say something. Jim turned. I blamed you for a long time. Thought you must have known. Must have been part of it. But hearing your name today, seeing you try to save people, I realized I was wrong. Jim's throat tightened. I led you there. You were lied to, same as me. Winters extended his hand. I'm sorry for doubting you. Jim looked at the offered hand for a moment, then took it. The grip was firm, honest. We both did what we could, Jim said. Now we finish it. Winters nodded. Marshal Ross looked up from his paperwork. Miss Morningstar, you said Blackwood is holding another woman. Lily Redbird. Yes, Tom's sister. She's 17. Where are they holding her? Tom said. Blackwood has a camp about 15 miles north, in the canyon country. Ross made a note. We'll need to get her out before we move on Blackwood. Can't risk him using her as a hostage. I know the area, Jim said. I can scout it. Find out how many men where they're keeping her. Not alone, you won't. Ross stood. We do this right. Legal. I'll deputize you and Winters. We go in with authority. Soon as Sam gets back. Soon as we know what we're working with. The door opened. A woman entered, middle-aged, wearing a simple dress and carrying a basket. She stopped when she saw the crowded office. Oh, Marshal Ross. I didn't realize you had company. I just brought some bread for you and the boys. Ross smiled, the first warmth Jim had seen from him. Thank you, Martha. That's kind. Martha's eyes moved across the room, landing on Sarah. Her expression shifted from pleasant to confused to something harder to read. "Is that an Indian?" Sarah stiffened. Jim moved slightly, positioning himself between them. "This is Sarah Morningstar," Ross said calmly. "She's under my protection." Martha's face pinched. "Marshal, I don't think it's appropriate, having one of them in town. After everything that's happened." "Everything that's happened," Ross said, his voice cooling, "was done to them. Not by them, but they killed settlers. Everyone knows. Some Apache fought back, yes, after we killed their families, stole their land, broke every treaty we made." Martha set down her basket with more force than necessary. "Well, I see where your sympathies lie." She turned to leave. Sarah stood. "Wait." Martha paused, looking back with suspicion. "Thank you for the bread." Sarah's voice was quiet but clear. "It was kind of you to think of others." Martha blinked clearly, not expecting this response. Her expression softened slightly, though the wariness remained. "You're welcome." She left. The door closed behind her. Sam returned less than an hour later, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came a procession of townspeople, 15 men and 3 women. They crowded into the office and spilled out onto the boardwalk. Ross stared. "Sam, what did you do?" "I told them the truth. That a decorated officer has been terrorizing Apache families, kidnapping women, falsifying reports, and that you need help bringing him to justice." A tall farmer stepped forward. "Marshal, I'm John Brennan. I got a daughter about that girl's age. If someone kidnapped her, I'd want good men to stand up. I'm volunteering." Others nodded, murmured agreement. A woman in her 40s spoke up. "I'm Clara Jensen. I run the boarding house. I'll provide food and lodging for anyone who needs it during this." Another man, weathered and lean. "Name's Robert Chen. I'm a tracker. Used to work as a scout before settling here. If you need someone who knows the land, I can help." Ross looked overwhelmed. His voice came out rough. "This town continues to surprise me." Jim watched the faces around him. Ordinary people, shopkeepers, farmers. A blacksmith still wearing his leather apron. Not soldiers, not lawmen, just people who'd decided that some things mattered more than comfort or safety. Sarah stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, though she made no sound. "We can't ask you to risk yourselves," Ross said. "You're not asking," John Brennan replied. "We're offering." Ross took a breath, then nodded. "All right. Here's what we're going to do." He spread a map across his desk. People crowded around. "Blackwood has a camp here in Two Ravens Canyon. We believe he's holding a young woman named Lily Redbird. Our first objective is to get her out safely. Second objective is to arrest Blackwood and anyone working with him." "How many men does he have?" Robert Chen asked. "At least 12, maybe more. They're armed and they're experienced. And we're shopkeepers," someone said. "You're citizens," Ross corrected. "That means something. That means you have the law behind you." He looked around at the assembled faces. "But I want to be clear. This is dangerous. Some of you might get hurt, might even die. So if you're having second thoughts, walk away now. No shame in it." No one moved. Ross's jaw tightened with emotion he was trying to hide. "All right then. We leave at first light tomorrow. Bring horses' weapons if you have them, supplies for 2 days. We meet here at dawn." The crowd began to disperse, people talking in low voices, making plans. Sam remained behind with Jim, Sarah Winters, and Ross. "That was something," Sam said quietly. Ross nodded. "Let's hope it's enough." As evening settled over Mesa Springs, Jim and Sarah found themselves sitting on the porch of the boarding house Clara Jensen had offered them. The street was quiet. Lamplight glowed in windows. Normal life continuing despite the storm that was coming. "You should eat something," Jim said. Sarah shook her head. "I can't. My stomach is too tight." Jim understood. His own appetite had disappeared hours ago, replaced by the familiar pre-battle tension. The knowledge that tomorrow people would put themselves in danger because of a promise he'd made. "All those people," Sarah said, "they don't even know me, don't know Tom or Lily. Why would they risk themselves?" Jim thought about this. "Because they know what's right. And sometimes knowing what's right is enough." Sarah turned to look at him. "You really believe that after everything you've seen, I have to? Otherwise, what's the point?" They sat in silence for a while. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A baby cried, then quieted, the sounds of life continuing. "Jim," Sarah said softly, "if something happens tomorrow, don't talk like that. But if we don't make it back." She met his eyes. "I want you to know your promise that night. It kept me alive through everything that came after." Jim felt his throat constrict. "I did care. I do. I know. And that matters more than you understand." She stood moved to the porch railing, looked out at the darkening sky. "My father used to say that a person's worth isn't measured by what they take from the world. It's measured by what they give. You gave me hope. You gave me life. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know you've already kept your promise." Jim stood, moved beside her. "We're going to get through this. You, me, Tom, Lily. We're going to see Blackwood face justice. And then we're going to build something better." Sarah smiled, though tears glistened in her eyes. "You sound so certain." "I have to be, because the alternative is giving up, and I'm done with that." They stood together as night fell completely, two people who'd been broken by the same violence, now standing together against it. Inside the boarding house, Clara Jensen watched them through the window and said a silent prayer. Across town, Marshal Ross cleaned his weapons and wrote a letter to his wife just in case. In his store, Sam Whitaker packed supplies and remembered every kindness the Apache had shown him over 30 years of trading. At the edge of town, in a small camp hidden from view, 3 men watched the lights of Mesa Springs and waited for dawn when they would ride back to Captain Blackwood with news. The pieces were moving. The stage was set. Tomorrow would bring either justice or blood, or perhaps, as so often happened in this unforgiving land, it would bring both. Dawn broke clear and cold over Mesa Springs. Jim woke before the sun, dressed in darkness, and checked his weapons by feel. The Colt revolver at his hip, the Winchester rifle, a knife in his boot. Tools of violence he'd hoped never to need again, but some promises required steel. Sarah was already awake when he emerged from his room. She stood on the boarding house porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the eastern sky turn from black to gray to pale gold. "Couldn't sleep?" Jim asked. "Too much thinking." He stood beside her. The town was beginning to stir. Lantern light appeared in windows. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted from the hotel restaurant. Normal morning sounds, normal life, but today would be anything but normal. "Are you afraid?" Sarah asked. Jim considered the question. "Yes, but fear means you understand what's at stake, means you're still human." Sarah looked at him. "My father said something similar once. He said, 'A warrior without fear is just a fool with a weapon.' Your father was a wise man." They stood in comfortable silence until Marshal Ross appeared, leading his horse. Behind him came the others: John Brennan and his teenage son, Clara Jensen's husband, Michael, Robert Chen, Sam Whitaker, looking older in the dawn light, but determined. 2 deputies Jim hadn't met before. Sergeant Winters, his wounded arm bound tight, but his eyes clear. And more. 15 people total, some on horses, some in wagons, all armed, all choosing to stand for something bigger than themselves. Ross surveyed the group, then nodded with satisfaction. "All right, listen up. We ride to 2 Ravens Canyon. It's a 15-mile journey, mostly through open country. We stay together. No one rides ahead. No one falls behind." He paused. "When we get there, Scout Caldwell and Chen will scout the camp, find out where they're holding Lily Redbird, how many guards, what we're facing. The rest of us will hold position and wait for their report. What if they see us coming?" someone asked. "That's why we're taking the long route, through the foothills. Harder riding, but better cover." Jim stepped forward. "One more thing. If we're discovered before we're ready, don't shoot unless you have to. Our goal is to rescue Lily and arrest Blackwood, not to start a war. But if they shoot first," John Brennan asked, "then you defend yourself. But remember, we're trying to be better than them. That means something." The group mounted up. Sarah rode beside Jim on a horse Clara's husband had provided. As they left town, Jim looked back once. Mesa Springs looked peaceful in the morning light. a place where decent people tried to live decent lives. He hoped it would still be standing when they returned. The ride took 3 hours. They followed game trails through scrub-covered hills, staying below ridge lines, moving carefully. Robert Chen rode ahead, scouting, making sure they didn't ride into an ambush. Twice he signaled them to stop while riders passed on a distant trail. Blackwood's men, probably. Unaware they were being hunted. By mid-morning, they reached a position overlooking Two Ravens Canyon. Ross called a halt in a grove of juniper trees. From here they could see the canyon entrance, but remained hidden. Caldwell, Chen. "You're up." Ross handed Jim a pocket watch. "You have 2 hours. After that, we come looking." Jim nodded. He turned to Sarah. "Stay with Sam. Don't do anything unless Ross gives the order." Sarah gripped his hand briefly. "Be careful." "Always am." Jim and Chen moved on foot, leaving their horses behind. They descended into the canyon using rocks and brush for cover, moving in near silence. Chen was good. Better than good. He read the land like a language, knew where to step, when to freeze. After 40 minutes, they smelled smoke, heard voices. They crept forward until they could see the camp. Blackwood had chosen his position well. The camp sat in a natural amphitheater protected on 3 sides by canyon walls. 8 tents arranged in a rough circle. A corral with horses, guards stationed at the canyon entrance and on high ground. Jim counted 12 men, all armed, all alert. In the center of the camp, separate from the other tents, stood a wagon with barred sides, a prison wagon. Through the bars, Jim could see a figure, small, female, long dark hair. Lily. Chen touched Jim's arm, pointed. On the far side of camp, a man emerged from the largest tent. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. Captain Nathaniel Blackwood. Even from a distance, Jim recognized him. The same straight posture, the same measured walk. 5 years had added gray to his temples, lines to his face, but the essential man remained unchanged. Jim felt cold rage settle in his gut. This was the man who'd orchestrated massacre, who'd used Jim's trust to murder innocents, who'd built a fortune on stolen land and broken bodies. Chen tapped Jim's shoulder, gestured that they should leave. Jim nodded. They'd seen enough. The retreat took longer than the approach. They had to move slowly, carefully, making sure no guards spotted them. By the time they reached the juniper grove, the sun was past its peak. Ross gathered everyone close. "What did you see?" Jim sketched the camp layout in the dirt. 12 men, maybe more inside the tents. Lily is in a prison wagon center of camp. 2 guards on the wagon, 4 more scattered around the perimeter. Blackwood is there. "Can we get to her?" Ross asked. Chen spoke up. "Not during the day. Too exposed. But at night, if we're smart, maybe." Ross considered this. "We wait for dark then. Caldwell, you and I will go for the wagon. Chen, you lead a group to the south ridge. Create a diversion if we need it. The rest hold position and be ready to move fast." "What about Blackwood?" Winters asked. "If we get Lily out clean, we surround the camp at first light. Give him a chance to surrender. If he runs, we chase him down. And if he fights," Ross's expression hardened. "Then we fight back." They spent the afternoon in careful preparation, checking weapons, eating cold food, trying to rest, but mostly just waiting. Waiting was always the hardest part. Sarah sat with Jim, neither speaking much, just drawing comfort from proximity. "When Lily is safe," Sarah said, "will you go back to your ranch?" Jim thought about the question. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe that part of my life is over. What would you do instead?" He looked at her. "Whatever needs doing, help rebuild what was destroyed. Make sure what happened at Crimson Ridge never happens again. That's a big promise. I'm good at keeping promises." Sarah smiled. "Yes, you are." As sunset painted the canyon walls in shades of red and gold, the group prepared to move. Jim strapped on his gun belt, checked the revolver, made sure the knife in his boot was secure. Ross approached his badge, catching the last light. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be." Ross handed him a deputy's badge. You're officially deputized. That means you have legal authority. Also means if something goes wrong, it's on both of us." Jim pinned the badge to his shirt. "Nothing's going to go wrong. You don't know that." "No, but I choose to believe it anyway." They moved out as full darkness fell. A group of 10 led by Jim and Ross approached the canyon from the east. Chen took 5 more to the south ridge. The rest stayed behind with the horses ready to ride in if needed. The approach took an hour, moving in darkness, testing each step, freezing when guards changed position. The moon was a thin crescent barely providing light, which was both blessing and curse. Harder to see, but also harder to be seen. They reached the camp perimeter. Jim could see the prison wagon maybe 50 yards away. Lamplight flickered inside some of the tents. Voices carried on the still air. Normal camp sounds, no alarm. Ross pointed. 2 of them would go. The others would provide cover if needed. Jim moved first low to the ground using shadows and camp clutter for concealment. A stack of supply crates, a wagon wheel, a pile of saddles. Each piece of cover brought him closer. He reached the prison wagon, knelt beside it. Through the bars he could see Lily more clearly now. She sat with her back against the far wall, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them. Her face was shadowed, but her posture spoke of exhaustion and fear. Jim tapped lightly on the bars. Lily's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. Jim put a finger to his lips, then whispered, "Lily Redbird." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm Jim Caldwell. Your brother Tom sent me. We're getting you out." "Where is Tom safe?" "He helped someone escape. Now we're helping you." Jim examined the lock on the wagon door. Heavy padlock. He could shoot it off, but that would wake the entire camp. Ross appeared beside him, breathing hard. He held up a set of lockpicks. "Old habits," he whispered. While Ross worked on the lock, Jim kept watch. A guard walked past 30 feet away, rifle over his shoulder, not looking their way. Another guard stood by the main tent, smoking, staring into darkness. The lock clicked. Ross eased the door open. Jim climbed into the wagon. Lily shrank back. "It's all right. We're here to help." He saw now how young she was, 17 but looking younger. Her dress was torn. Her wrists showed rope marks, though they'd healed somewhat, but her eyes held more anger than fear. "How do I know I can trust you?" Jim pulled back his collar, showing the scars on his own neck. 5 years ago, I saved 4 people from a burning camp. Your cousin Sarah was one of them. She sent me to you." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah is alive." "Yes, and waiting for you." Lily stood on shaking legs. Jim helped her to the wagon door. Ross waited outside, hand extended. They helped Lily down, keeping low, moving slowly. They'd made it perhaps 20 feet when someone shouted, "Hey, the wagon!" Everything happened at once. A guard raised his rifle. Jim shoved Lily toward Ross. "Get her out!" The rifle fired. The bullet whined past Jim's head. He rolled, came up, drawing his Colt, fired twice. The guard went down. The camp erupted. Men boiled out of tents, grabbing weapons, shouting. More gunfire. From the south ridge, Jim heard Chen's group open fire, creating the diversion Ross had planned. But it wasn't enough. Jim ran, following Ross and Lily toward the canyon exit. Behind them, a dozen men gave chase. Ahead, the rest of their group opened fire, providing cover. A bullet kicked up dirt near Jim's feet. Another slammed into a rock beside his head, spraying him with stone chips. He returned fire, not aiming, just trying to slow their pursuers. They reached the canyon entrance. Horses waited. People shouted, pulling Lily onto a horse, firing past Jim at the advancing men. Then Jim saw him. Blackwood stood at the edge of his camp, illuminated by lamplight, rifle in hand. For a moment their eyes met across the distance. Recognition sparked. Blackwood's face twisted with rage. Caldwell Blackwood raised his rifle. Jim dove behind a boulder as the shot cracked past. When he looked again, Blackwood was mounting a horse, shouting orders. Half his men were mounting up as well. They were going to give chase. "Ride," Ross shouted. "Everyone ride." The group scattered into the darkness, horses at full gallop. Jim swung onto his mount, kicked hard. The horse leaped forward. Behind them, he could hear pursuit. Shouts. More gunfire. They rode hard through the night, following Chen, who knew the terrain. Through narrow passages between rocks, across dry creek beds, up slopes that had the horses blowing hard. Always moving. Always staying ahead of Blackwood's men. After an hour, Chen led them into a box canyon he knew. A dead end, but with high walls and only one entrance. Defensible. They dismounted, breathing hard. John Brennan's son had taken a bullet in the leg, superficial but bleeding. Clara's husband had been grazed across the ribs, but Lily was safe. Sarah ran to her, and the two young women embraced, sobbing. While Ross organized defenses and Jim checked ammunition, Sarah and Lily found a quiet spot near the canyon wall. They sat close shoulders, touching, catching their breath. For a long moment, neither spoke, just breathed. The first moment of peace since the chaos began. Finally, Lily whispered, "I thought I'd never see you again." Sarah took her cousin's hand. "Tom made me promise. Said you were strong, that you'd survive until we came." Lily's tears fell freely now. "I wanted to give up so many times, but you didn't." Lily looked at her. "Because I remembered something Grandmother said, about how promises are threads that connect souls across any distance. I felt that thread, knew someone was coming." Sarah glanced across the canyon at Jim, who was helping bandage John's son, caught his eye. Jim looked back. For just a moment, despite everything, despite the coming battle, there was something like peace. Sarah turned back to Lily. Grandmother was right. Promises matter more than we know. They sat together as the sun began to set, two survivors finding strength in each other, preparing for whatever came next. Jim checked his ammunition. 5 rounds left in the Colt, 12 in the Winchester. Not much for a prolonged fight. Ross moved among the group, checking injuries, offering reassurance. But Jim could see the worry in his eyes. They were trapped. Blackwood knew it. Come morning, he'd attack. Jim climbed to the canyon rim, where Chen had positioned himself as lookout. They could see the entrance to the box canyon below, empty now. But not for long. Chen spoke without looking away from his watch. "They'll come at dawn. When they can see to shoot, probably. We got the girl out, though." "That's something," Jim nodded. "That's everything." They sat in silence for a while. Then Chen said, "I was at Sand Creek. You heard of it, Jim had. Another massacre, another tragedy. I didn't stop it," Chen continued. "Didn't even try, just followed orders. Killed people who never had a chance to fight back." His voice was quiet, steady. "I left the army after that, came here, tried to make a different life, but I never forgave myself." He turned to look at Jim. "Tonight, we saved one girl, one life. It doesn't balance the scales, but maybe it's a start." Jim thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made, about all the ways a person could try to make amends for the past. "Maybe it is," he said. Below, the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky. Dawn was coming, and with it Captain Blackwood and his men riding hard, ready to finish what they'd started. Jim chambered a round in his rifle and settled in to wait. Some promises, he thought, required you to stand your ground, to fight even when the odds were impossible, to believe that doing right mattered more than survival. He'd made such a promise 5 years ago. Today, he'd keep it, or die trying. The sun rose slowly over the box canyon, turning the eastern sky from gray to pink to brilliant gold. Beautiful, indifferent. The kind of morning that promised heat and clarity in equal measure. Jim Caldwell stood at the canyon rim, rifle ready, watching the entrance below. Beside him, Robert Chen scanned the horizon through a borrowed spyglass. Behind them, down in the canyon proper, 15 people prepared for a fight none of them had asked for. Marshal Ross moved among them, his voice calm, offering encouragement, checking weapons, making sure everyone knew the plan, or as much of a plan as they had. Hold the entrance, make every shot count, wait for help that might not come. Sarah climbed the rocky path to where Jim stood. She carried a rifle, now moved with it like she'd been born to it. Her face was set with determination that reminded Jim of her father. That same fierce dignity in the face of impossible odds. "You should stay down there," Jim said, "where there's cover. I can shoot, I know. But if something happens to me, someone needs to look after Lily." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Nothing is going to happen to you. You don't know that." She turned to face him fully. "Listen to me, Jim Caldwell. You made a promise 5 years ago. You've kept it. You saved me. You saved Lily. You've done everything right." Jim shook his head. "If I'd done everything right, we wouldn't be trapped in a canyon waiting to die." Sarah grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "We're not going to die. Do you know why Jim waited? Because the people down there," she gestured to the canyon floor, "they chose to stand with us. Ordinary people who could have stayed home, could have stayed safe. But they chose justice over comfort. That kind of courage doesn't lose." Jim wanted to believe her, wanted to feel the certainty she projected. But he'd seen too many good people die for lost causes. Chen lowered the spyglass. Movement, southeast, multiple riders. Jim's stomach tightened. Here it came. Through the morning haze he could see them. 8 riders, maybe 10, moving at a steady pace toward the canyon entrance, confident, unhurried. Men who knew they had their quarry trapped. Ross climbed up to join them. "How many? 8 confirmed. Probably more we can't see yet." Ross pulled his own spyglass, studied the approaching riders. "That's not Blackwood's full force. He's holding men back, either as a reserve or to flank us." Chen pointed west. "There, 3 more riders moving through the rocks, trying to get above us." "It's what I'd do," Jim said. "Pin us down from the front. Shoot down into the canyon from above." Ross cursed softly. "All right. Chen, take 3 men. Get to the west rim. Stop anyone trying to climb up. Caldwell, you and I hold this position. Everyone else stays down in the canyon, ready to move if we're breached." He looked at Sarah. "Miss Morningstar, I need you down there. Help keep people calm." "Can you do that?" Sarah nodded, though Jim could see she wanted to argue. She squeezed his hand once briefly, then climbed back down. The riders were closer now. Jim could make out details. The lead rider sat his horse like a general surveying a battlefield he'd already won. Every inch of him radiated unearned certainty. Blackwood. Even at this distance, even after 5 years, Jim recognized him. The way he held himself, the absolute confidence in his posture. This was a man who'd never failed at anything he'd set his mind to. A man who believed the world bent to his will. The riders stopped 50 yards from the canyon entrance. Out of easy rifle range, but close enough to be heard. Blackwood dismounted, walked forward a few paces, hands empty and visible. His voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "Marshal Ross, I know you're in there." Ross stepped into view at the canyon rim. "Captain Blackwood, you're under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy, and murder." Blackwood laughed. The sound was genuine, amused. "Marshal, you don't have the authority to arrest me. I'm a civilian. You'd need federal warrants, due process, none of which you have. I have testimony from Sergeant Winters, witness statements, evidence of your crimes. You have the word of a disgraced soldier and a handful of savages. No court in this territory would convict me. Then you'll have no problem surrendering, coming to Mesa Springs, facing trial." Blackwood's smile disappeared. "I'm not surrendering, Marshal. And you're not leaving that canyon alive unless you hand over the girl. And Jim Caldwell." Jim felt ice in his stomach. This was personal for Blackwood. Not just about covering up crimes. About revenge. About destroying the man who'd betrayed him by saving lives. Ross's voice hardened. "That's not happening. Then we have a problem." Blackwood turned, walked back to his horse. Mounted up. He raised his hand and his riders spread out, taking positions around the canyon entrance. He called out one more time. "You have until noon to reconsider. After that we come in and we don't leave survivors." The riders withdrew, slightly settling in to wait. Ross lowered his spyglass. "He means it. He'll attack at noon." Jim checked the sun's position. "Maybe 3 hours. What do we do?" Ross was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, We hold. We fight. And we hope someone in Mesa Springs had the sense to send for help. Did you send word? I told my deputy to telegraph Fort Grant if we weren't back by morning, but it's a long ride from the fort. Even if they got the message, even if they're coming, they won't make it by noon, so we're alone. Yes. Jim looked down into the canyon. At the people gathered there, Sam Whitaker, 64 years old, holding a rifle with arthritic hands. John Brennan and his teenage son, the boy trying hard to look brave. Clara Jensen loading a shotgun with steady hands despite the fear in her eyes. Lily and Sarah standing together supporting each other. Ordinary people, decent people, about to die because they'd chosen to stand for something right. No, Jim said, we're not alone. Ross looked at him. We've got 15 people willing to fight. That's not alone. That's an army. Ross studied Jim's face, then nodded slowly. You're right. Let's make sure they know what they're fighting for. They climbed down to the canyon floor. Ross gathered everyone close. Faces turned toward him, some frightened, some determined, all waiting for direction. Ross spoke clearly, letting his voice carry. You all know the situation. Blackwood has us trapped. He's going to attack at noon. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from help. He paused. But we have something he doesn't. We have the truth, and we have each other. Blackwood thinks power comes from fear, from violence, from taking what you want, and damn the consequences. Ross's voice grew stronger. But real power, lasting power, comes from standing together, from choosing right over easy, from saying this far and no farther. He looked around at each face. I won't lie to you. Some of us might not survive this. But win or lose, live or die, what we do here today matters. Because we're not just fighting for one girl, we're fighting for the idea that justice means something, that ordinary people can stand against corruption, that might doesn't make right. John Brennan spoke up. Marshal, I'm scared. I won't pretend I'm not. But I'd rather die scared and right than live safe and wrong. Others nodded, murmured agreement. Sam Whitaker cleared his throat. I've lived 64 years, seen a lot of things, good and bad, and I'll tell you what I've learned. The world changes when good people decide they're done being quiet. He looked at Sarah and Lily. These young women deserve better than we've given them. Better than broken treaties and stolen land and violence without consequence. If we can give them that even for a day, even for an hour, then it's worth it. Sarah stepped forward. All of you, you don't know me, don't know my people. You have every reason to turn away, to say this isn't your fight. Her voice caught, but she pushed through. But you didn't. You stood up. You risked everything. For me, for Lily, for justice. Tears ran down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. My father used to say that true wealth isn't what you own. It's what you're willing to give. You've given me hope, given me family, given me proof that good people still exist in this world. She looked directly at Jim. Whatever happens today, I want you all to know you've already won because you chose to be better. The canyon fell silent. Then Clara Jensen started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Others joined in. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, a strange counterpoint to the threat waiting outside. Jim felt something shift in his chest. Guilt had been his companion for 1,825 days. But looking at these people, seeing their courage, something had finally changed. But looking at these people, seeing their courage, he realized something. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about what you did next, about the stand you took, the promises you kept. Chen called down from the rim. Movement west side. They're trying to climb up. The moment of unity broke. People scattered to positions. Jim climbed back to the east rim. Ross positioned himself at the canyon entrance with 5 men. Chen and 3 others held the west approach. The morning dragged on. The sun climbed higher. Heat built in the canyon. People drank water sparingly, checked and rechecked weapons, waited. Jim watched Blackwood's camp. The riders had built a small fire, were making coffee, eating, casual, as if laying siege was just another day's work. Around 11:30, Blackwood mounted up. His men did the same. They formed a line, checking weapons, adjusting saddles, preparing. Ross called up from below, "Caldwell time." 30 minutes. "Get down here." Jim climbed down one more time. The canyon floor was organized now. Cover built from rocks and wagon parts. Fields of fire established. Everyone in position. Ross gathered the fighters one last time. "Remember, aim carefully. Make every shot count. If they breach the entrance, fall back to secondary positions. We funnel them in, make them pay for every foot." He paused. "If it comes to it, if we can't hold, there's a crack in the north wall. Narrow but passable. Women and wounded go first. Everyone else provides cover." No one argued. They'd all accepted what was coming. As people moved to positions, Ross pulled Jim aside to a quiet corner of the canyon. "Ross Caldwell, there's something you should know about why this matters to me." Jim turned, waiting. Ross took a breath. 10 years ago, I was a lieutenant, Fort Union, Colorado Territory. Blackwood was my captain then, too." Jim's eyes narrowed. Ross continued. "He ordered me to lead a raid on a Ute village, said they were hostiles. I scouted ahead, saw it was families, refused the order." "What happened?" Ross's jaw tightened. "He had me court-martialed for insubordination, dishonorably discharged. It took me 8 years to clear my name, get reinstated as a territorial marshal." Jim understood now. "That's why you believed us so quickly." Ross nodded. "I've been waiting 10 years for evidence against him, for a chance to do this right legally. So when Winters walked through my door," he paused, "this isn't just duty, Caldwell. It's the reason I became a lawman again." Jim extended his hand. "Then let's finish what he started." They shook two men bound by the same enemy, the same need for justice. Jim found Sarah. She stood with Lily, both holding rifles. "You remember what I taught you?" Jim asked. "Breathe, aim, squeeze, don't pull." "Good." He looked at Lily. "You know how to shoot. Tom taught me." Lily's voice was quiet but steady. "I won't let them take me again." Jim nodded. "You won't have to." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell Sarah everything he'd been too afraid to say before. But Ross was calling positions, and there was no time. Sarah seemed to understand. She touched his face, gentle. "After this is over, we talk, really talk, about everything. It's a promise. You're good at keeping those." She smiled, and for just a moment the fear disappeared from her eyes. Then noon arrived. Blackwood's riders formed up, 8 men on horseback, 3 more on the ridges with rifles. Blackwood himself at the center, tall and confident. He raised his hand. "Let's finish this." The riders charged. They came fast, firing as they rode bullets, whining off rocks and kicking up dirt. Ross's group opened fire from the canyon entrance. 2 horses went down immediately. One rider screamed as he fell. His leg crushed beneath his mount, but the others kept coming. Jim fired, levered another round, fired again. Beside him, Chen did the same with mechanical precision. On the west rim, gunfire erupted as Blackwood's men tried to climb up, met by devastating fire from above. The first wave hit the canyon entrance. Ross and his men poured fire into them at close range. Another rider fell. His horse reared, unseating him. But 3 made it through into the canyon proper. Everything became chaos. Gunfire echoed off canyon walls, deafeningly loud. Smoke filled the air. Men shouted, screamed, cursed. Horses whinnied in panic. Jim saw John Brennan take a bullet in the shoulder, go down hard. Saw his son drag him to cover, tears streaming down his face, but still firing his rifle. Saw Sam Whitaker, ancient and steady, drop a rider with a single shot, then calmly reload as if he had all the time in the world. Saw Sarah and Lily fighting back to back, their rifles speaking in rhythm. One of Blackwood's men broke through, heading straight for the women. Jim didn't think, just moved. Dropped his rifle, drew his Colt, ran. The rider raised his gun at Sarah. Jim fired on the run. Once, twice. The rider jerked, fell from his horse. Jim reached Sarah, as another rider rounded a rock formation. This one had a revolver, was already aiming. Jim threw himself in front of Sarah, felt the impact like a hammer blow to his side. He fell, hit the ground hard, couldn't breathe. Pain exploded across his ribs. He'd been shot before, knew what it felt like. This was bad. Sarah's face appeared above him, screaming something he couldn't hear through the ringing in his ears. Then she was gone, standing over him, firing her rifle with cold precision. The rider went down. Jim tried to stand, couldn't. The world tilted. He could see the battle continuing around him, Ross fighting hand to hand with one of Blackwood's men, Chen on the rim, firing steadily. People falling, people fighting, people dying. Then through the smoke and chaos, Jim saw him. Blackwood had dismounted, was walking into the canyon on foot, rifle in hand, men scattered before him. He walked with the confidence of a man who knew he couldn't lose, who'd always won, who believed the universe bent to his will. His eyes found Jim on the ground, found Sarah standing over him. Blackwood smiled. "There you are, Caldwell, still trying to save them, still failing." He raised his rifle. Sarah stepped forward, placing herself between Blackwood and Jim. "You'll have to go through me." Blackwood's smile widened. "If that's what it takes." Then a voice rang out, clear and commanding, cutting through the battle noise. "Nathaniel Blackwood, stand down." Everyone froze. Into the canyon entrance rode a column of cavalry, 20 soldiers in full uniform. At their head, a Captain Jim didn't recognize. Behind them, more riders, federal marshals by their badges. And at the very front, on a white horse, sat Sergeant Jacob Winters, his wounded arm still in a sling, but his back straight and proud. The captain called out again, "Captain Blackwood, you are under arrest by order of the United States Army. Drop your weapon now." Blackwood looked at the soldiers, at his own men half dead or wounded, at Jim on the ground, at Sarah standing defiant. For the first time, Jim saw uncertainty in Blackwood's eyes, the realization that he'd finally overreached, that his power had limits, that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. Blackwood dropped his rifle. The battle was over. The aftermath of violence always felt strange to Jim, the sudden quiet after thunder, the way the world continued as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. Soldiers moved through the canyon, disarming Blackwood's men, tending to wounded on both sides. The cavalry captain, whose name was Douglas Morrison, directed operations with efficient calm. Federal marshals took custody of Blackwood himself, binding his hands, reading charges that seemed to go on forever. Jim lay on the ground where he'd fallen, Sarah kneeling beside him, pressing cloth against the wound in his side. The pain was there, sharp and insistent, but distant somehow. Shock, probably. He'd been shot enough times to recognize the feeling. "How bad?" he asked. Sarah's hands shook as she worked. "You'll live." The bullet went through, missed anything vital. "But you're bleeding a lot." "Good. Dying would be inconvenient." "This isn't funny, Jim." He managed a weak smile. "A little bit funny." A soldier approached carrying a medical kit. Young man, maybe 20, with kind eyes. "Ma'am, let me help." Sarah moved aside reluctantly. The soldier cut away Jim's shirt, examined the wound with practiced efficiency. "You're lucky," he said. "Clean through and through. Cracked a rib probably, but no organs hit. We'll get you bandaged up." As the soldier worked, Jim watched the scene around him. John Brennan sat against a rock, his son beside him, both wounded but alive. Sam Whitaker was helping Clara Jensen tend to others, his hands steady despite his age. Chen stood at the canyon rim, rifle still ready, making sure no threats remained. And Lily. Lily sat with her knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, sobbing with relief. She'd survived. They'd all survived. Well, most of them. Jim saw 2 bodies covered with blankets. 2 of the townspeople who'd ridden out that morning wouldn't ride back. Michael Jensen, Clara's husband, and a young farmer named Thomas Reed. They'd died for a promise Jim had made, died so a girl they'd never met could be free. The weight of that settled on Jim like a physical thing. Marshal Ross approached, limping slightly, his face streaked with powder smoke and blood from a gash on his forehead. "Caldwell, you still with us, for now." Ross knelt, wincing at his own injuries. Winters rode to Fort Grant. Got there just after dawn. Convinced Captain Morrison to ride out immediately. Said it was a matter of justice. Morrison's a good man. Came without hesitation. How did Winters make it past Blackwood's men? Ross smiled grimly. Apparently Winters was a better scout than anyone knew. Slipped past them in the dark. Rode 20 miles on a wounded arm. That's courage. Or stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing. The soldier finished bandaging Jim's wound, helped him sit up slowly. The movement sent pain shooting through his side, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. Sarah returned carrying a canteen. She helped him drink. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the best thing Jim had ever tasted. "Thank you," he said, "for standing over me, for fighting. Thank you for taking that bullet." Their eyes met and held. Everything they hadn't said, everything they'd been too afraid to acknowledge, passed between them in that look. Ross cleared his throat. "We need to get everyone back to town, wounded first. The rest can follow." Jim tried to stand, failed. Sarah and Ross helped him up, each taking an arm. The world spun briefly, then settled. "I can ride," Jim said. "You can barely stand. I've ridden in worse shape. That doesn't make it smart, but it makes it necessary." He looked at Ross. "I need to see this through. Need to make sure Blackwood faces justice." Ross studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But you're riding in a wagon. Non-negotiable. Fair enough?" The journey back to Mesa Springs took the rest of the day. The wounded rode in wagons, soldiers providing escort. Blackwood and his surviving men rode in chains, federal marshals watching them with hard eyes. Jim drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride. Every bump sent pain through his side. But Sarah stayed beside him, her hand in his, and somehow that made it bearable. They reached Mesa Springs as the sun was setting. The entire town had turned out, lining the street, watching in silence as the procession passed. Children, elders, shopkeepers, everyone. When they saw the wounded, saw the covered bodies of Michael Jensen and Thomas Reed. A sound went through the crowd. Not quite a gasp, not quite a moan, something deeper. The sound of a community confronting the cost of courage. But when they saw Lily Redbird alive and free, when they saw Blackwood in chains, the mood shifted. People began to clap, slowly at first, then building. Applause mixed with tears, pride mixed with grief. Clara Jensen pushed through the crowd to the wagon carrying her husband's body. She placed her hand on the blanket, her face crumpling. But when she turned to the crowd, her voice rang out clear and strong. "He died doing right. He died standing for something. Don't you dare pity him. Honor him." The applause grew louder. Jim watched from his wagon, feeling the weight of it all, the sacrifice, the courage, the terrible price of justice. Sarah leaned close, her voice soft in his ear. "You did this. You brought them together. You showed them it was possible to stand against evil. I just kept a promise. You kept hope alive. That's bigger than any promise." They took Jim to the doctor's office, a small building behind the general store. The doctor, a thin man named Weber, examined the wound, clicked his tongue, and set to work cleaning and rebandaging it properly. "You'll live," Weber said, "but you need rest, real rest, not your version of rest where you work yourself to exhaustion. How long? 2 weeks minimum. A month would be better." Jim started to protest, but Sarah cut him off. "A month. You'll stay in town. We'll make sure you rest. We, Lily and I. Someone needs to keep you from being stupid." Despite the pain, Jim smiled. "Yes, ma'am." Over the next 3 days, Mesa Springs transformed into something Jim had never seen. The town became headquarters for a federal investigation. Marshals interviewed witnesses. Soldiers took statements. Captain Morrison personally oversaw the building of a case against Blackwood that seemed to grow larger by the hour. More victims came forward. Apache families who'd been terrorized, settlers who'd been threatened. A pattern of violence and corruption stretching back years. Sergeant Winters testified for 8 hours straight, laying out everything he'd witnessed, everything he'd suspected, everything he could prove. His testimony was devastating, clinical, unshakable. On the fourth day, Jim was strong enough to walk. He made his way to the marshal's office where Ross sat behind his desk, looking exhausted but satisfied. "They're transferring Blackwood to Fort Grant tomorrow," Ross said. "Federal court-martial. He'll face military justice." "Will it stick?" Ross nodded. "Morrison says they have enough evidence to hang him 10 times over. Between Winters's testimony, Sarah's, yours, and all the others who've come forward, there's no question." Jim sat carefully, his side still tender. What happens to his men? Most are cooperating, testifying against him in exchange for lighter sentences. 3 are facing murder charges. The rest will do time for kidnapping and conspiracy. And Lily's safe. Tom Redbird arrived yesterday. They're reunited. Ross smiled. That was something to see. 2 siblings who thought they'd never see each other again. Jim felt something loosen in his chest. The promise he'd made to Sarah, the promise that had started all this, was finally fulfilled. "You did good work, Caldwell." Ross leaned back in his chair. "The Army is talking about offering you a position. Official scout, good pay, respect." Jim shook his head. "I'm done with the Army. What will you do?" "I don't know yet. Build something maybe? Help rebuild what was destroyed. The school Sarah keeps talking about, maybe." That night, the town held a memorial service for Michael Jensen and Thomas Reed. The church was packed. People stood in the aisles, spilled out onto the street. Reverend Harper spoke about sacrifice and courage and the price of standing for what's right. Clara Jensen spoke about her husband, her voice steady despite the tears. Michael always said a man's worth isn't measured by what he takes from the world, but by what he gives. He gave everything. And I'm proud of him. Thomas Reed's mother spoke next, an elderly woman who could barely see but whose voice carried to every corner of the church. "My boy was gentle, kind. He loved animals and children and growing things. The world will be less without him, but he died making it better. That's not nothing." After the service, people gathered outside. Someone had set up tables with food. Others had brought instruments. What started as a wake slowly transformed into something else. A celebration of life, of community, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Sarah found Jim sitting on the church steps watching the gathering. "You should be resting. I've been resting for 3 days. Any more rest and I'll go crazy." She sat beside him close enough that their shoulders touched. "It's almost over," she said. "What is this chapter? Blackwood going to trial, justice being served, the promise you made being kept." Jim was quiet for a moment. "And then what?" "Then we start the next chapter. Build the school, create something lasting. Give Apache children a place to learn without forgetting who they are. That's a big dream. So was bringing down Blackwood. We did that, we had help, and we'll have help with this too." She looked at him. "If you're willing." Jim met her eyes. "I'm willing, but I need to know something first. What? This school, this dream. Is it just about education, or is it about something more?" Sarah smiled. "It's about everything. About healing, about proving that different people can work together, about honoring the past while building a better future." She paused. "And yes, it's about you and me, if you want it to be." Jim felt his heart beat faster. "I'm not an easy man to be with. I have nightmares, guilt, scars. So do I. So does everyone who's lived through what we've lived through." She took his hand. "But maybe that's why we understand each other. Maybe that's why this could work." Before Jim could respond, a commotion erupted near the food tables. He stood, hand instinctively moving toward his gun, but Sarah laughed and pulled him back down. "It's just Sam and Reverend Harper arguing about pie recipes." Jim relaxed, allowed himself to smile. "This is nice. All this, people coming together. It's what community is supposed to be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the gathering. Children ran between tables. Musicians struck up a tune. People danced, laughed, remembered, grieved, and celebrated all at once. Tomorrow, Blackwood would be transferred to Fort Grant. In 2 weeks, his trial would begin. In a month, justice would be served. But tonight, in this moment, Mesa Springs was exactly what it needed to be. A place where people cared for each other, stood together, proved that goodness could prevail. The next morning, a column of cavalry arrived to transport Blackwood. Captain Morrison personally supervised the transfer. Blackwood was brought out in chains, his uniform stripped away, his bearing diminished. He looked smaller somehow, less commanding, just a man facing consequences. The entire town turned out to watch, a silent crowd lining the street, bearing witness. As Blackwood was loaded into a prison wagon, his eyes found Jim in the crowd. For a moment their gazes locked. Blackwood's face twisted with something between rage and despair. "You think you've won Caldwell? You think this changes anything?" Jim stepped forward. "Yes, it changes everything." Blackwood laughed bitter. "One man goes down. The system continues. There will always be others like me." "You're probably right," Jim said. "But there will also always be people like us, people willing to stand up, and eventually we win." Blackwood started to respond, but a marshal cut him off, secured him in the wagon. The door slammed shut. The column prepared to move out. Sarah appeared at Jim's side. "How do you feel? Tired? Relieved? Ready for what comes next?" The wagons rolled out. The crowd slowly dispersed. Life in Mesa Springs began returning to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. Over the next weeks, as Jim healed and Blackwood's trial proceeded, plans for the school took shape. A location was chosen on land donated by the town near the site of Crimson Ridge. It would serve as both memorial and promise. A place where the past was honored but didn't define the future. Tom Redbird signed on as a teacher to share Apache language and culture. Sam Whitaker pledged funding from his store. Reverend Harper convinced his church to provide supplies. Slowly, impossibly, the dream became real. 6 months after Blackwood's arrest, on a clear spring morning, the school opened. A simple wooden building with a bell tower and large windows that let in the light. 20 students on the first day, Apache children and white children sitting side by side learning together. Sarah stood at the front of the classroom, nervous but radiant. Jim sat in the back, watching. Beside him sat Chief Greyfeather, Sarah's uncle, who'd traveled from Arizona to see this moment. "Your niece is strong," Jim said. "She learned from you," the chief replied. "You taught her that promises matter, that standing up matters, that one person can make a difference. I didn't teach her that, she already knew it. I just reminded her." The chief smiled. "Then you both taught each other. That's what the best partnerships do." As Sarah began her first lesson teaching the children numbers in both English and Apache, Jim felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. Not forgetting the past, but using it to build something better. That evening, as the sun set over the school, Jim and Sarah stood together on the steps. The children had gone home. The building was quiet, but the promise it represented echoed louder than any words. "We did it," Sarah said. "We actually did it. You did it. I just helped." She turned to him. "Stop doing that. Stop minimizing what you've done. You kept a promise that saved my life. You stood up to Blackwood. You brought a community together. You made this school possible. We made it possible." Sarah smiled. "Fine. We." She moved closer and Jim found his arm around her shoulders without conscious thought. It felt natural. Right. "What happens now?" she asked. "We teach. We build. We make sure what happened at Crimson Ridge is never forgotten, but also never repeated." "That's a good plan." Jim looked down at her. "And maybe, if you're willing, we build something else too. Something personal. Something lasting." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Jim Caldwell, are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm saying I spent 5 years running from my past, hiding, trying to forget. But you taught me that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying the past with you and using it to build something better." He paused. "I want to build that something with you, if you'll have me." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My father used to tell me a story. about a warrior who made a promise to protect a child. The warrior kept that promise even when it cost him everything, and because he kept it, the child grew up to become a leader who brought peace to her people. She looked up at Jim. I always thought it was just a story, but now I think maybe he was telling me about you, about us, about the future we could build. Is that a yes? Sarah smiled, rose on her toes, and kissed him. It's a promise, and promises, Jim knew, were made to be kept. Epilogue. 5 years later, the school at Crimson Ridge had grown. 2 buildings now instead of 1. 40 students instead of 20. 3 teachers instead of 1. A library funded by donations from across the territory. A garden where children learned to grow food using both Apache and settler techniques. Jim Caldwell stood in the garden helping a group of 10-year-olds plant corn. His hair was grayer now. His sides still ached when the weather turned cold. But his eyes held something they hadn't before: contentment. Sarah emerged from the school building carrying their 2-year-old daughter on her hip. The girl had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Her name was Hope because that's what she represented. Papa, the girl called, reaching for him. Jim wiped his hands on his pants, took his daughter, lifted her high. She giggled the sound like bells. How's the planting? Sarah asked. Good. These kids learn fast. They have a good teacher. We have good students. Sarah smiled that same smile that had kept Jim going through the darkest days. They stood together watching the children work their own child between them, and Jim thought about how far they'd come. From a burning camp to a growing school. From guilt and isolation to purpose and family. From broken promises to promises kept. In the distance, he could see the monument they'd built. 23 names carved in stone. A memorial to those lost at Crimson Ridge. Fresh flowers placed there every week by students who never knew the victims, but knew their stories, remembered their sacrifice. Justice had been served. Blackwood had been hanged 2 years ago, his execution witnessed by Sergeant Winters and Marshal Ross. His men had been imprisoned. The truth had been told and recorded and taught to new generations. But more than justice, something else had grown. Understanding, respect. A community that crossed cultural lines. Children who learned 2 languages and 2 sets of traditions and saw both as valuable. A future built on the ashes of the past. Tom Redbird approached carrying supplies for the garden. Lily walked beside him, now 22, engaged to marry a young Apache man from Chief Greyfeather's band. Both wore the easy confidence of people who'd survived darkness and emerged stronger. Caldwell, Tom said, "Got a minute?" "Always." They walked a short distance from the children. Tom pulled out a letter. "This came from the territorial governor. He wants to meet you, wants to talk about starting similar schools elsewhere. Thinks what we've done here could be a model." Jim took the letter, read it quickly. "What do you think? I think we started something bigger than we knew. I think maybe 1 school isn't enough." Jim looked back at Sarah, at Hope, at the students in the garden. 1 school is never enough, but it's a start. So we go to the Capitol meet with the governor. We go. But we bring Sarah, and we bring students. Let them speak for themselves. Let the governor see what's possible." Tom grinned. "You've gotten political in your old age. I've gotten tired of watching good ideas die because the wrong people tell them." "Fair enough." That evening, as the sun set and the students went home, Jim sat on the school steps one more time. Sarah joined him, as she had so many times before. Hope slept in her mother's arms, peaceful and safe. "Do you ever think about that night?" Sarah asked. "The night I came to your ranch every day. Do you regret it?" Everything that happened after Jim thought about this, about the pain and the violence and the loss, about Michael Jensen and Thomas Reed and all the others who'd sacrificed, about the scars he carried and the nightmares that still came sometimes. "No," he said finally. "Because of that night, 23 deaths were honored instead of forgotten." Lily was freed. Blackwood faced justice. And this, he gestured to the school, this became possible. He looked at Sarah. "And I found you again. found purpose again, found a reason to believe the world could be better. Sarah leaned against him. "I told you once that you were good at keeping promises. I remember. You've kept every one. The promise to keep me safe, the promise to bring Blackwood to justice, the promise to build something lasting." Jim kissed the top of her head. "There's one more promise I want to make." "What's that?" "I promise to keep teaching these kids, to keep building bridges, to keep fighting for a world where what happened at Crimson Ridge never happens again." He paused. "And I promise to love you and Hope with everything I have for as long as I live." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears. "Those are big promises, Jim Caldwell. Good thing I'm good at keeping them." They sat together as night fell over the school at Crimson Ridge. In the distance, a coyote called. The wind moved through the garden, rustling corn leaves. Stars appeared one by one, ancient and indifferent and beautiful. Tomorrow more students would come. More lessons would be taught. More bridges would be built. The work was never finished. The dream was never complete. But tonight, in this moment, Jim Caldwell felt something he'd thought lost forever. In the smoke and fire of a terrible night 5 years ago, he felt whole. And that, more than justice, more than redemption, more than anything else, was the promise finally kept. The promise to himself, the promise to believe again, the promise that broken things could heal and build and grow, that out of ashes could come life, that from the worst night could come the best days, that a man who'd led others to massacre could lead others to peace. That was the real promise of Crimson Ridge Memorial School. Not just education, not just cultural exchange, but hope. And hope, Jim had learned, was the most powerful promise of all. The end.